Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Fingal's Cave podcast. I'm Phil Salathé, and frequent listeners to this podcast may notice that I'm suffering from a bit of a cold. My voice is a bit lower than usual, so perhaps it's then a very good thing that we're doing this interview virtually, because I'm honored to welcome today Jerry Shirley, drummer and percussionist, who has a storied career of many decades. Pink Floyd fans will probably know him best for his work with Syd Barrett, while the rest of the world may know him best for decades of performing with, and now overseeing, the acclaimed and internationally renowned band Evil Cardboard. And by Evil Cardboard, I mean, of course, Humble Pie. But
Yeah,
that's a story that deserves telling. Would you mind telling the Evil Cardboard story again? We chatted about it earlier.
yeah. When we formed, the the press were calling us a supergroup, which was very weird for me because I was completely unknown, whereas the other three were all from big bands. Syd Barrett was a big star from being in the Small Faces. Peter Frampton, the same thing from being in the Herd, and Ridley was a big underground star from being one of the most respected bass players due to his work with Spooky Tooth. And then there was me, which was like being, no one knew me. Anyway, so we decided to, in order to pick a name, and bearing in mind that we came out at the same time, exactly at the same time as Blind Faith, Crosby, Stills and Nash, um, a number of others, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and so on, Led Zeppelin. So, given that, if you think about it, that Blind Faith called themselves Blind Faith, I mean, I'm showing that they were, hey, labeling us with something that you're expecting to be great, like give us a chance to prove ourselves. So we said, right, let's all think of a name, put that name, write it down, piece of paper, put them all in a hat, and we'll pick them out one by one and see which one we decide will be the best. I did to put Evil Cardboard, ridiculous, because that was the end of a spliff, a joint. In England, we rolled hash joints, and you had to roll a piece of cardboard up to make a tip, at the end. And so when you're smoking it, if you got down to the end, it was like, oh dear, evil cardboards.
Mhm.
Ridiculous. So, of course, we didn't choose that. But then the one that I can't remember who was picking them out, but whoever did opened it up and read it out, and it said Humble Pie. And I said, that's the one. Now, everybody immediately agreed. And then Steve said, well, yeah, that's the one I wrote. And so that was it. I mean, I don't remember what the other guys' contributions were, but it wasn't, thankfully, Evil Cardboard. And Humble Pie was perfect for us saying, wait a minute, don't expect too much. This supergroup thing was out of hand, really. Let us prove that we can be that. Not assume it's going to be. And the great part about it was when we first announced it. It was a band, it was a comedy band that included Mike McGeer, Paul McCartney's brother,
Mhm.
Mike McCartney, who came. Anyway, they were called Scaffold. They had comedy or satire. One of them was called Lily the Pink. Others, anyway. John Gorman, I think it was the guy that one of the members wrote an article, and it came up. It was talking about this whole thing about supergroups and referring to us. He said, "Oh yeah, then let's get to Humble Pie, or should I say, arrogant casserole?" I
That's
thought,
brilliant.
well, fantastic, arrogant casserole.
Oh, man.
So, we could have been that, we could have been things, but we ended up with humble pie.
I think if there are any students out there who plan to, play a set of your music, and they're looking for a name to do it under, you've just handed them two perfect, arrogant casserole and evil cardboard. So it's sort of like there's a Pink Floyd tribute band called Anderson Council, or there was at one point because they named themselves after Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. So they just took the other
Yeah.
halves of both people's names. So, to borrow a phrase from David Gilmour, actually, let's start out by I'd like to ask you to cast your thoughts back many years and think about When do you still remember when you first picked up the drums? Do you still remember that moment where you decided like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My father, who was a drummer himself back in the mid 30s, right before World War II, he and his brother had a swing band, a dance band at the time. And anyway, so I think he always what really happened was we bought a pub, lived in a public house, uh, whereby they ran the pub downstairs and we lived upstairs.
Hmm.
And my father would hire a band every Friday night, and we would set up. Well, later on, once I got into drumming, we'd set my kit up, but I would watch the bands when they played on Fridays and see these great professional drum kits set up. And anyway, one afternoon, my father was watching telly upstairs before the pub was open, and he suddenly shouts, Jerry, Jerry, come here, quick, quick, quick. And I would run upstairs. And what it was a very famous drum battle between Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa.
Ah,
I think it was called the Jack Parr Show, the one that preceded Johnny Carson. They did it more than once, but this one, it was in black and white, and it would just blew me away. It's absolutely,
oh, Buddy Rich still blows me away after all this time watching him
yeah, I
play.
mean,
Yeah,
he's the best.
yeah.
And Gene Krupa's next best. See, Gene Krupa was the top guy until Buddy Rich came along, and no one has, not even Bonham, has topped Buddy Rich. Buddy Rich could, if he was asked, do everything Bonham could do. I'm not so sure that Bonham could do everything that Buddy Rich could do. Bonham was the modern version of being the best there is, but he still wasn't. Buddy Rich was just unique. He didn't even write music. I didn't even read music.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
Buddy Rich up there with he's got charts for his bands and all that, and
They're all in his
he's
head.
coming from up here,
Yeah.
you know. And he got better and better and better the older he got. I'm not so sure that he didn't go on a bit too long because of the strain on his heart playing like that
Mhm.
must have been intense. They say keep playing, you don't get old when you stop playing drums. When you stop playing drums, you get old. Instead
Mhm.
of when you get old, whatever. And
Mhm.
I'm not so sure that's true. I had to stop playing a while ago, and I don't miss it only because I, like you, play different instruments. I play guitar,
Mhm.
and at home. Well, I don't have room for a drum kit in my apartment. It's not big enough. And where I live, I drive the neighbours crazy. I live in a very compact little courtyard in an apartment above shops and cafes and things. I don't think a drum kit would have been, but apart from that, I had to stop for physical reasons for a while because I had to have my hips replaced.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
how have those been doing? I remember I read about that and wondered how. Is it?
yeah, it was fine. But I could still play drums, but I couldn't walk.
Mhm.
So I needed to get walking because I was putting on weight and my health I needed that exercise.
Mhm.
And the weird thing was that whilst it hurt to walk before they did the operation, it didn't hurt to play drums
Mhm.
because I started playing when I was 9 years old.
Mhm.
And I hadn't stopped until I was in my 60s. And what it did was it deformed my hip bones.
Mhm. Almost
So
like a
they
horseback
developed,
rider.
yeah, they bend instead of being straight.
Mhm.
So they put these titanium things in the straight hips. And I'm great to walk. I'm walking all day long. Thank you very much. But I get to sit behind a drum kit after they'd healed and everything.
Mhm.
And after 15 minutes, it really started to hurt
Mhm.
because it was not used, the hips weren't used to being in that position. And I just figured, well, look, I have had a great run. I've enjoyed it. There weren't any gigs at the time, and I had family matters I had to take care of aside from my own health. So it was just time to sort of call it a day there for a while. You know, I've had the odd sit in with people. Was sat in with Peter at the Roundhouse in London several years ago. That was fun.
Hmm.
And you know, if something like that came along, I might do it. But I'm happy with I don't like being on the road, you
Hmm.
know, and that's somewhere it's to do with my sobriety. You know, all my I've been sober for now nearly 28 years, you know, almost 30 years, and all the trouble I got into was on the road drinking,
Hmm.
and thought the best way to avoid both was to stay, just not, you know, stay away from the road. You know, um, I did have a nice time for a while playing for Deborah Bonham and her band, and John's younger sister, and that was great fun. And they understood; they didn't mind that I was sort of antisocial with them. You know, I didn't hang out in the bar with them. I stayed in my room, and they got it. They understood why. But anyway, so that's what started me was seeing Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa, and then I got in. I was already into Ray Charles, and I got turned on to one particular on two Ray Charles albums. One was Ray Charles in person, which was live in Atlanta,
Hmm.
recorded by Ahmet Ertegun on one microphone on a Uri reel to reel, like probably mono,
Hmm.
maybe I don't even think it was just mono.
Sort of an official bootleg,
Sound,
really.
that sound is just remarkable. And then Quincy Jones arranged and produced an album with Ray called Genius Plus
Soul, isn't
Jazz
it?
equals
Is it?
Soul.
Yeah, Genius Plus.
Genius plus Jazz equals Soul, or
Yeah,
Genius plus Soul equals Jazz.
yeah.
And some of the tracks on that were by mostly Sonny Payne,
Hmm.
the drummer that was with Count Basie for a large part of his career. And in fact, Quincy used Count Basie's orchestra on some of that album.
Hmm.
And the drumming on that album just blew me away. It just swung like a stripper's tits. It was just wonderful. And you know, I'd started from day one. If it didn't swing, it didn't mean a thing. You know,
Hmm.
it's an old saying, but it's so true.
Hmm.
Has to swing. Doesn't matter what type of tempo it is, or what type of groove, so long as it's got some swing in it. And to me, that means syncopation.
Hmm.
And my father always told me that just remember you've got to keep the beat and you've got to make it swing. You've got to make it so that if you look in the audience, you see a woman dancing, make sure you're making her ass move.
Hmm. It's true. It's all about the dance, isn't it? I mean, at
Yeah,
heart, it's if it swings,
absolutely.
it makes you want
Yeah,
to dance.
that's what makes people, you know, music is supposed to move you, and that type of music is physically music that makes you swing, you know.
Hmm. You'd be surprised, I think. When I was studying as a musician, two of my biggest mentors were a jazz musician who recently passed away, really more of a free and avant-garde musician named Charles Gale, associated with people like Milford Graves, if you happen to know that name. A lot of the avant-garde musicians in the 60s and 70s. And then
Yeah,
my other teacher was a composer of very challenging, dissonant, like string quartets and piano pieces and things like that. But they saw eye to eye about that trait of music, that it has to have the dance in it. It's got, it doesn't matter what style you're writing in. It has
mm,
to have that kind of, and of course, what are we all born with a heartbeat that goes boom, 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 boom. It's like
yeah,
the
yeah,
rhythm, human life is rhythmic in nature, something I
indeed.
think. So Another thing about your history as a musician too is you started quite young. You were gigging and having, fairly high
Yeah.
profile gigs and encounters with people like Jimi Hendrix when you were,
Well, I started at,
mid-teens.
I was 9 years old. By the
Mhm.
time I was 14, I was doing sessions at Olympic Studios for Steve Marriott. When Kenny had enough and had said, time for me to quit and go get some rest, and Steve still wanted to keep going, he'd call me. And I had to
Mhm.
go up there and perform and play for him. And in the Olympic Studios, there was Studio A was the big room, Studio B was the small room. And so we would be in the small room with Steve while people like the Stones or Jimi Hendrix or Traffic or whoever were in the big room. And Steve's party piece was while I was getting the drum sound, doing the drum check, and the engineer was getting the sound.
Mhm.
I was very young, obviously, very shy, very self-conscious, and I would play with my head down. I hope no one's watching. I always had this. I always thought, well, I'm going to get found out. They're going to figure out I'm no good.
Oh, everybody I've ever met who's really good at anything has that feeling, right?
Absolutely. You just, insecurity, I suppose. But so there were two occasions that stuck out in my memory. Were one was when I looked up and there was Steve with Mick Jagger on one side and Charlie Watts on the other.
Mm.
And I just stopped playing and wanted the ground to swallow me up. And I just quietly got off the kit and started walking towards them. And Charlie came over to me, bless his heart. He put his arm around me. He said, "That was great, man." He said, "That was really good." He said, that was made me want to chop my wrists off." I mean, of course, he was a far better drummer than I would ever be. But I was 14 years old and he could see the potential and he could see I was shy and very, very self-conscious. And he just did that to pick me up, to give me some confidence. Within a week or two, or within a month, I can't remember how long, and very soon thereafter, exact same thing happened, except this time I look up and it was Steve standing there with Jimi Hendrix. Because he'd go next door and say, "You got to come see this kid play drums. It's going to knock you out." And of course, he did. He went and got them, and they were, and all that Jimi Hendrix said was, "Hey, man, that was cool. That was really cool."
Mm.
Back then, that was the biggest compliment you could get.
Mhm.
Anything that was that cool, man. And then Steve would also tell him how good I was at rolling a 14 skin joint. It was just this long. Because
Oh,
anyway, so by that time I was 14, and Steve kindly recorded a single for us for our band, my brother and myself and two other guys had a band that were a Small Faces copy band, really.
mhm.
Um, but he liked us. He liked us as people. We became good friends. And that was released on Immediate Records in 1967. So I would be 15 by then.
And that was not
Um,
Apostolic Intervention, right? That's a different
yeah,
project.
yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, we changed the name. See, the band started out as Little People, Small Faces, Little People. Couldn't, was too obvious. Small Faces Cop. So Andrew Oldham said, "We're going to change the name." Steve wanted to call us The Nice, but
Hmm.
another band was called. He said, Andrew said, "No, no, no. We're going to call it Apostolic Intervention,"
Yeah.
which we hated. But Andrew was the boss, and it was his label, so we went along with it. And then he turned around and called Pat Arnold's backing band The Nice, which was Keith Emerson and his drummer and bass player, Lee Jackson, and I can't remember the drummer's name right now, but they had hits on their own right. They did an instrumental version of America,
Mhm.
and it was a hit. It was 7 minutes long and it was a hit. But they were started out as P.P. Arnold's backing band.
Oh,
She was singer on Immediate Records. You know, she was an Ikette, which curiously we ended up with one of the original Ikettes in the Blackberries with Humble Pie, which were Vanessa Fields, bless her heart. In fact, we also had a Raylette because we had Clyde King. We had two of the finest of the American black backup singers that you could get, great solo singers too. You know, and what a privilege that was to have them with us.
and the
I had
Raylettes. Oh, I was just gonna say the Raylettes were just in case anybody doesn't know,
Ray
Charles was
Charles,
backup
yeah,
singers. Yeah.
sure. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Clyde had a lovely story. She said, "Yeah, when in order to become a Raylette, you had to let Ray."
Yeah. I've heard that one too. Oof, different times.
Yeah, different time indeed.
Yes.
But yeah, well, that was. I had a very, very privileged youth. I was very lucky. Um, it almost peaked too soon, but I coped with that. Others, I know that a similar thing happened to, didn't cope. You know, I managed to get some longevity out of it by going along to other bands because Humble Pie's original lineup include the, you know, from this time we started to where we broke up when after Clem had been with us for a few years, was only was 6 years, I believe, 69 to 75. And then we got back together in 80, 81, 82. And then I got back together with Steve as his own band. Although we split everything evenly. It was called the Packet of Three. And that was a great little three-piece band. But so I'd been with Steve all the way from headlining, or working the way up to headlining and selling out Madison Square Garden, all the way back down to playing little pubs in and around England, to 20 people sometimes packed houses, sometimes not, and it was always fun, you know, no matter what. Not necessarily off stage, you know. Steve could be hard work, but on stage, always a good time, usually. You know.
I found that drummers are, often some of the most humble musicians in terms of, gratitude for life's opportunities. I sometimes wonder whether it's just because there's a work ethic that gets instilled in you from such a young age where you have to schlep all this equipment over and over again. You're kind of in contact with reality because it's just like, nope, this is what life is. Life is, moving big, heavy cases, and lots and lots of equipment to get to, enjoy a special place musically, I mean, for about, an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then you have
could be, I mean, most drummers, I say you get the occasional drummer. Most drummers that are big heads are ones that don't swing. They might be great. They might have all the flash in the world, and it don't mean a thing if they don't swing. It just doesn't. You can have all the technique in the world, and unless you can keep, a two and a four, and unless you can put some syncopation in there, the rest of it means nothing. To me, it just doesn't.
And that was the old trick that A&R men at record companies used to use. They would go to listen to a band, and oftentimes they would decide right away based on the drummer. As if the drummer was good and could swing, they knew it had to be a good band. Even if they were having an off night, they knew it had to be a good band. Whereas if the drummer was no good, they knew that unless
there's not one band that became huge that didn't have a great drummer as their bass. They needed a great singer and a great guitar player and a great bass player as well. But you cannot name me one that had an average or non-swinging drummer in a band that went on to be great, or if they did, they weren't much fun to listen to. There are some out there, but I don't like naming names in a derogatory way.
Right.
There's some drummers that have got fantastic reputations that aren't, they've got all the technique,
Hmm.
way more than anything I would ever have or ever want to have, but they just haven't got that thing, that hits you, that beat, that heartbeat that
Hmm.
means so much. And some of those have got great reputations, fantastic. See, I can't really say this without bad mouthing
Ah.
someone. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, we don't need to name names. I mean, I can think just at the other end of the spectrum of so many people like Ringo Starr, Charlie Watts, people who I think are often underestimated because they're not
Absolutely.
flashy, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like yeah, say to anybody, you try going and doing what they do. It's not
Yeah.
easy. It takes, yeah, it
No,
takes,
it's not easy at all.
yeah.
Ringo himself admits, he said, I can't even do a roll properly. He said, but that's not the point.
Right.
The point is that you keep the beat right where it needs to be.
Hmm.
And McCartney just recently has said many times when they knew that they were happening was for the first time they played with Ringo,
Yep.
because he added that extra special something.
Hmm.
And with us, when we started playing together, what really made it click was Greg and I clicked immediately. We had a connection, and on top of that connection, so the other two connected with it,
Hmm.
so to speak. And we just started from day one. We were just grooving our asses off. We were having fun from the very beginning. And, no matter how bad things got off stage, like I said earlier, on stage, it was always fun. You
Hmm.
know?
Definitely.
So,
So,
Syd Barrett.
Syd Barrett, yes. So, do you remember the first time you met him? Does that moment stick out in your mind?
Um, the first time, I, not really, I think probably it was at Dave Gilmour's, David's apartment,
Hmm.
because in the hippie days, we all lived in Chelsea, but not like fancy Chelsea. It was all bean bags on the floor, drinking tea and rolling joints, and it wasn't a lot of drinking going on. A few other things, comestible, um, comestibles.
Comestibles and combustibles, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, there was Dr. Robert, the famous doctor that the Beatles wrote about. It was legal, but was handing out everything and anything. And then there was, you know, hash. Actually, hash was the main thing. There wasn't a lot of pot in England back then. There is now, but it was mostly black hash and Lebanese, red Lebanese.
Probably much easier to transport and smuggle because it
Yeah,
was much more
yeah, I think
compact. Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Coming from Europe, to, through the red Lebanese, make you weak in the knees and stuff. But there was also Afghani black that was much sought after,
Hmm.
and Pakistan came from mostly Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Lebanon
Hmm.
or
Interesting.
Morocco.
Morocco,
Yeah,
that's one I've often heard about. Yeah, Morocco
yeah.
being another one. So,
So I met him somewhere in there at Dave's, and then got to Willie Wilson, the other drummer on both of Sid's albums,
mhm,
and we shared a flat, and Sid used to come round to our flat to hang out.
mhm. And this was back
He'd
when
come,
he was still pretty together then at that point, right? He hadn't begun to show
yeah, he
signs of.
hadn't one. It was perfectly normal in a one-to-one basis, or just sitting in a flat. It was funny. You could tell he would have his weird moments. He had those dark eyes that would just be staring into the middle space, the middle distance, and he'd kind of be off in his own little world. But he was also still capable of being conversational and relatively normal.
Hmm.
And I remember he used to come to our apartment all dressed up, ready to go to the club that everybody went to back then called Speakeasy, where
Hmm.
all the musicians went, and a lot of jamming happened there. Hendrix was known to get up and jam at Speakeasy regularly, as were many others. And so it's the place to go. Well, Syd would come round to our house, knock on the door, all dressed, said, let's go to the Speakeasy. And we look at our watch and it's Syd, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. So we would sit around drinking tea, smoking pot until 11 o'clock at night when it was time to go to the Speak.
Mm,
And he never had any money on him, never.
really?
And Willie and I would take him to Speakeasy, and again, he'd be perfectly normal, relatively normal,
Hmm.
until he got into the Speakeasy. And as soon as, which, where he wanted to go, it was his idea.
Hmm.
But as soon as he walked through the door, and there's all those people looking at him,
Hmm.
he just froze and went into that middle distance stare, and you couldn't get a word out of him.
Huh.
And
No,
then you think, well, why did you want to come?
it's my the co-producer of the podcast, my friend Ian Preston. He did an interview with Rosemary, Sid's sister. Did you ever meet her, by the way? Do you remember having?
And I've never actually met her.
Oh,
No.
okay. She had they brought up the topic of what we now call neurodivergence. Some people would say autism spectrum disorder. And the thing that's so striking about that story to me is, I've both members of my family and friends who have autism, and it's exactly like that. They can handle one-on-one very well. And as soon
Hmm.
as this noisy, crowded environment, for them, instead of it all kind of going off into the background and then being able to tune it out, it's like as though everyone's voices are equally loud. So it's overwhelming
Yeah,
to them. I almost wonder whether that was going on
it
because,
could be.
yeah.
But now, what's that? That was autism? Did you say?
Yeah, autism is often associated with people having a really hard time with too much coming at them, too much information, too much noise.
Well, what's interesting about that is that the type of deafness I have through playing too loud, too long,
Hmm.
one of the symptoms or one of the side effects of it is exactly that.
Hmm.
When you're in a crowded environment and you're trying to hear what the one person is saying to you, you're hearing everybody around at the same volume.
Yes.
So I can understand what that is like because it's very difficult just on a deafness level.
Hmm.
It's better when you've got hearing aids in because it's focusing on what's closest to you,
Hmm.
sound wise. But even that is it. So that's interesting. There's someone close to me that has just been diagnosed as autistic, and that makes sense. I won't say who it is;
Hmm.
it's too personal, but it makes sense that they would. Some of their behaviour makes sense now,
Hmm.
if that's what autism can do to you.
I think so. And I think it's also a problem in AI. They're trying to figure out how to make hearing aids that can figure out what you want to listen to, but it's
Yeah.
actually shockingly hard for a computer to figure out which of the 10 conversations nearby is the important one. Because, of course,
Mm.
for some folks, yeah, if their hearing aids could just amplify the person next to them and push everybody into the background, that'd be perfect. So, yeah, no, Rosemary, I think, and Ian really talked about different ways that if Syd were alive now, people might try to understand how his brain worked differently. And
Yeah.
instead of just saying, oh, he's, strange or whatever it was that people said, instead maybe having a name for it would help them understand.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I definitely think that the idea that yes, he did go away one weekend and take too much acid with a bunch of people that were irresponsibly giving him too much, or he was irresponsibly taking too much, and he did come back a changed person. But that happened to a lot of people, but it was temporary. They would have eventually come back to normal. It happened to me, but on a smaller scale. I took it once and had a really rough time, and I can remember getting back to my parents' house, thinking, "Oh God, please make me normal again." This
Hmm.
is not a good. It was a come down from the trip, but it wasn't fun. And then I thankfully quit taking it. Now, Sid would come back changed, but if was it the acid that made it so profound, or was there a condition there that could have been treated? He could probably have done with a time out
Hmm.
because they were working all the time, and it was the onset of that fame and that it wasn't the fortune yet, but there was the fame and the people and just he could have done with a timeout. And the band have been very honest later in life and said we didn't handle it well.
Hmm.
We could have been done better by him. And that's one thing that I've always been very proud of David because of the way he dealt with Syd's solo albums.
Hmm.
He was very patient. He insisted that Syd played all the guitar.
Hmm.
Because he could have easily played the guitar and made that side of it more perfect, if you like, but he didn't
Hmm.
want that. It was Syd's record,
Hmm.
and we had to do a lot of things. Look, today there will be other ways around it, but then we had to work out ways of getting stuff out of him that wasn't just okay, guys, let's learn a song, one,
Right.
two, three, four, and off we go.
Hmm.
No, that we did it actually three ways. One was that we all played together.
Hmm.
Um,
I think
and
Gigolo On was recorded that way, wasn't it? As I recall.
Gigolo,
Gigolo On, yeah.
yeah, that was the one that got from start to finish all the way through. I thought we got it in the first or second take, but I looked at looked it up somewhere, and apparently it's take 15.
Yeah.
I don't remember doing it 15 times, but yeah, maybe that's. I was used to getting it on the first or second take with Humble Pie, so I think we probably did it and then went back to it. But I do the actual version that's out there was done from start to finish as one whole piece, and the band was Syd on guitar and vocals, David Gilmour on bass, Richard Bright on keyboards, and me on drums.
Hmm.
That's a pretty good band.
Yeah. I'd buy a ticket.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounded great. It's goofy, but it's great. The best track on the album, I didn't play drums on, neither did Willie. In fact, Dave Gilmour played the drums on a track called Dominoes.
Right. That's the one
He
where they
did it.
had to reverse it to get Sid to do the guitar
Yeah,
solo, right?
yeah. They played it in order for he could not. Syd couldn't get the lead guitar part at all. So Dave came up with the idea of playing it to him backwards, so he'd get a backwards guitar when you turn the tape round the right way, and he got it right the first take.
Mm.
That is just so weird. And it, but anyway, Dave did the drums on that as an overdub, I believe, and it sounds great. It's terrific.
So
And
something.
that was the other way we did it. Was he would record
Mhm.
a whole track with Syd playing guitar and singing, and get enough of a track to where he'd put the bass on it, but he'd bring me in, and because it was so goofy, it was up and down and sideways and all over the place. He would conduct me through it. He'd memorize it.
Mhm.
It's got a brilliant musical memory, and he knew I'd never sit there and just listen to it and try. There's nothing to follow.
Mhm.
So he would stand in front of me and conduct me through it. Baby Lemonade being the best example of that. And it's up a bit, and down a bit, and it's over to the left, but it made it work.
Mhm. Now, you'd originally come in to your first sessions with Syd were actually for Madcap Laughs, right, with Malcolm
Yeah.
Jones, and I've learned something I had no idea about, which is that you played bass on I think one track.
Yeah,
Uh,
one or two. I think it was Maisie.
mhm.
Was that on which album was Maisie on? That was on
Oh
Mac.
wait, Maisie was on. Let me double check. Maisie's on Barrett actually. Okay, so I was
Okay.
getting that the wrong
Well,
way around. Yeah. So I think I think Malcolm Jones said that you had played on that album. You came in with Willie Wilson. I think I remember you telling the story that you had the car and he had the license, something like that.
yeah. Yeah, we
Um,
used to drive our other job was to drive Sid to the studio. Anyway,
so
go ahead.
Malcolm Jones. And by the way, do you have much memory of Malcolm Jones? He's not
Not a
some.
lot.
Mhm,
Not really, to be honest.
mhm. I
Nice
mean,
man, as I remember, but anyway, so what has he got down as who did what?
he has you down, and this is of course some years ago. He said he was ill during some of those sessions, that he had I think colitis and had to sort of be away for some of them. But he has you down for, let me just check my notes, make sure I don't want to get anything wrong. No Man's Land and Here I Go. Yeah, and Here I Go, that's that's got a very kind of steady, again, it makes me think to some degree of music hall. I think it's a very kind of music hall song of Sid's. And then the other one, No Man's Land. The story seems to be that you all did kind of a rough take together with I think Willie Wilson on drums, you on
Yeah,
bass and Sid
Willie did more of the drums on Madcaps. I did more of the drums on Barrett.
on Barrett. Hmm.
And then there was Robert Wyatt,
Hmm.
Soft Machine, did some of the drums on Madcap. Not that much, but some.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, he was such a you mentioned in your email to me. I mean, he was such a drummer, and when he
Yeah.
lost the ability to play in '73, oh, what a loss! Because he was something special. So, and then one thing, by the way, that in the middle of all this that happened, although we're getting kind of more toward the Barrett era, is I was amused to find out apparently you played on that BBC session in 1970, and I think at the time when you spoke with John Edgington, you had
Yeah.
no memory of it at all. Has
No,
that has
no,
listening to it brought anything back, or is it still like,
no,
uh,
no, I don't remember the session at all. I just remember them calling me. Um, a record company had gotten the rights to record, to release them, and they contacted David, and David said, "Yes, you can release them so long as Jerry gets his dues."
mhm,
And I don't remember them. I don't remember the sessions at all.
mhm,
I do remember the live show that we did where Sid
right,
walked off stage after the fourth number or during the fourth number, I think it was.
mhm,
But I'm curious on that, going back to Madcap,
mhm,
on on the track list,
mhm.
does it list any on there where I played the bass or not?
It's one of those things where depending on where you look, you get contradictory answers. The consensus seems to be that on No Man's Land you play the bass, and then I think you went back and maybe overdubbed it because either you didn't like your first take or something like that. So you sort of put down a complete band recording, and then the bass was then overdubbed. So
Yeah.
it's not clear to me honestly. It's
Yeah, that
possible.
sounds right. Willie always says that I tried playing the bass on it and couldn't get it because it was all over the place, the actual track. But I do remember that there was certainly, um, I'm sure, the bass on,
On
well,
On
whether
Maisie,
we
was it?
used it or not, I don't know. But on Maisie, I remember playing the bass on that.
I'll have to go back and give that a fresh listen. I can sort of play it back in my mind, but I don't have it memorized, so to speak.
But it's got me down as playing drums on that, does it?
I'd have to check. Most probably,
Okay.
yeah. I'd have to,
Yeah.
pull out five encyclopedias. So, and something, by the way, I've noticed. I mean, this sort of goes back to something you said a little bit ago. Having reviewed some interviews of yours, preparing for today, you know, you clearly have a great deal of respect for the way that David Gilmour, handled everything, and he seems to have been very protective and remained very protective of Sid.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was his friend, at school. I mean, they were buddies long before Pink Floyd or any of that. And, he felt he he was thrilled to get the job, but the circumstances were not pleasant, having to take over from his what was his one time. It seems to me because I didn't know Syd back then. I felt like a bit of an intruder in a way because I wasn't one of the Cambridge gang that grew up together. I went to Cambridge later to play in a band, and that's how I got to know Dave originally, David. And he has got tremendous, you can tell he had tremendous love for the man. And he always describes him back in those days, before Pink Floyd, as just funny, bright, um, had a spring in his step, good guy, always had a great looking girlfriend. One of his girlfriends. Have you seen the documentary about him yet? It's called Have You Got It Yet?
No, I haven't had the chance to see it yet. No.
Well, the two of the girlfriends that are interviewed in there, one were girls that I got to know later. One more of a sister type, a scale opinion. She was lovely. She used to look after my farmhouse for me when I was on the road. And then before that, a lady called Lindsay, who I was younger than her, and she reminded me of that regularly.
Yeah.
you're you're my toy boy.
Oh,
She's only
jeez.
3 years older than me, I mean, or whatever it was. But she, I was so in love with that woman. Good Lord.
Hmm.
And they were both beautiful ladies. Oh, dear, were they good looking. But lovely too, funny, fun. You know.
Mhm. I remember long ago, yeah, I had a girlfriend and I played some of Syd solo recordings for her and mentioned that, a lot of women seem to be drawn to his music. And after I played her a few songs, she looked at me and said something to the effect of course, like he's singing about, singing about us, he's singing about love, he's singing, it's like
Yeah.
she could feel the magnetism, I think, radiating
Oh,
from
yeah.
those recordings.
And of course, on top of that, in back in the day, he was one hell of a good looking guy. He had it all.
Mhm.
And I came along as he was in the falling apart stage, but did get to see some of the good stuff still. There was a lovely story about him sitting at David's apartment. There was a whole circle of people drinking tea,
Mhm.
and each cup had a sign of like Cancer, Aquarius,
Mhm.
signs of the zodiac. And so someone started the conversation by saying, "Oh, look, I'm an Aquarium, but I've got Sagittarius. What have you got?" And it kept going around. Oh, I've got Cancer, and I've got Libra, I've got such and such. And it gets to Syd, and they say, "Syd, what have you got?" And he looks at it, it says tea. But
That's fantastic.
so,
Oh,
good,
so
lovely man.
mhm. You'd mentioned that gig, and you'd also mentioned, that Syd kind of needed time to, recoup. You needed to have, and the word kept that coming to my mind is pressure. And it's interesting to learn recently, how much pressure there was for that gig that you and he and David Gilmour did together, that they really wanted to, I guess, use it to promote Barrett, to promote the album. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
one question I had is, could you all hear each other? Like, in other words, just thinking about what it's like as a musician, I think one of the most demoralizing things is if you can't hear the other members of the band, you all kind of feel like you're playing into the wind. Do you remember feeling like you could all hear each other? Everybody was sort of communicating reasonably well, and then it just kind of stopped.
Um, well, yeah, I mean, I don't remember us doing a lot of rehearsing. That's
Hmm.
for one disadvantage. And it seemed to get sprung upon us quite quickly. I don't, there was no prep time. And here we are, we're on stage, and we managed to get, apparently, so I thought he walked off after the first number, but apparently he got all the way to the fourth song.
Hmm.
Um, and then just stopped, put his guitar down, and walked off, and left Dave and myself standing there, or sitting there playing, kind of. Well, I guess we better quit too. And that was it. It was very peculiar.
Mhm.
What are you going to do? And it was a big gig. It was a big, big hall, and a place called Olympia, and it was, it was called something that's fashions extravaganza.
Yeah, music and fashion extravaganza. Let me get
But
that right. Extravaganza Music and Fashion Festival. There we go.
but
That's
and
what's.
I when I was first told that, I said, "Oh, well, we were fashionable, were we?" No.
Mhm.
It occurred to me or David that we were fashionable. Sid probably looked the most fashionable amongst us.
Mhm. Do you have many memories of Richard Wright, or Rick Wright?
Dave was lovely. He was the nicest man, apart from Dave, in the band, because I knew Dave, although he had just joined, knew him before Pink Floyd took off, if you like, in a big way with him. And we kind of took off together. He had just got the gig with the Floyd, and within a year, I'd got the gig with Humble Pie. And then we lived right round the corner from each other in Chelsea. So we hung out together a lot and we did the albums together. And then we both were being inundated with hangers on.
Mhm.
So that if our Willie and my apartment was full of people, one of us would sneak into the bedroom and call Dave and say, "How's things at your place?" And he'd say, "Oh, there's no one here." So we'd make up an excuse and would tell Dave, "We'll be right there," and go into the living room, say, "Sorry, we've just had a call from the studio. We've got to go to work. You'll have to leave."
Huh.
So they'd go, we'd run down, hop in my mini little car and fly around the corner, get to Dave's, knock on the door. He'd open the door with this big smile on his face and say, "Come in." And there they all were.
Mhm.
They'd got to his place before we got a
Oh,
chance.
okay. Oh, wow. Oh, jeez.
You know, in other words,
Oh,
they'd left and run to Dave's place. And by the time we got there, which was in a hurry, they'd already got, settled in.
oh.
So David and I said, "We've got to get out of London.
Yeah.
This is too much." And my father found a nice house for me to look at. And I chose not to buy it because there was some question as to whether the government were going to buy some of the land attached to it as a compulsory purchase to build houses on. And so I chose not to. And I found this beautiful derelict Elizabethan farmhouse
Hmm.
a few miles further out and bought that and fixed it up. And Dave went and looked at the house that I'd refused and decided to buy it. And it turned out great for him. So we were connected in a lot of ways. He got on great with my dad, and I got on great with his mum, dad, and even later on when I moved to New York for a while there, I was living on LaGuardia Place, and his parents had an apartment right in the middle of LaGuardia Place.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, we were good close buddies for many years, and we still are. We just don't see each other very often.
Mhm.
You know, we speak occasionally, and I'm just very happy that he's as happy as he is now.
Yeah.
He's in time of his life.
Yeah, he's
Uh,
thriving in the spotlight. I mean, it's, on his own
Absolutely.
terms, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And that was the main thing, on his terms,
Yeah.
not not on someone else's.
Right. I wonder who. Um, Speaking of, by the way, the band, were the words Pink Floyd, to your recollection, ever uttered during those sessions with Sid, or is it was just one of those things that nobody said those two words?
I don't remember it coming up at all. It was
Right.
all
It
about Sid.
was all about him. Yeah.
What are you going to do? How are we going to do it? There was no. Do you remember? I mean, there might have been discussions that I didn't hear, like
Mhm.
Dave saying, "Oh, you remember that song you used to play before the Floyd when we were young, and it ended up on the album called Effervescent Elephant."
Mhm.
That he wrote when he was 15 or younger,
Mhm.
Great,
Oh, that's
lovely
wonderful.
track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that he just did. It was one take, and as far as I know, and Dave hadn't put the tuba on the front of it.
Hmm.
It's a lovely song,
Absolutely.
Um, and that's the main thing is that the songs will outdo the messiness of the musicality of it. That added charm to it, really.
Mm-hmm. I've seen the point raised, I think by you and by Willie Wilson as well, that for anybody raised on old blues recordings, some of Sid's irregularities, it's just like, well, that's how they played the blues in the 20s and
That's right.
30s and 40s too. So
Yeah,
the meter follows the text, or what they want to say and when they want to say it.
exactly.
Yeah. So I sent you a recording of something of a track that circulates among Pink Floyd fans and Syd Barrett fans, and no one to this day has been sure what to make of it. It used to get called Sunshine. I think I sent it to you under the name No Title, but it's about a minute of, I think you remember that, a minute of the shuffle groove, and
Mhm.
we had a little bit of an email about it. Do you want to talk to our listeners about what you heard? And I think the conclusion was that you think it's not
And
the.
I've listened to it many times and
Mhm.
to try and figure out. I don't think it's me.
Mhm.
It might be a loop made up of a piece of my drumming that
Mhm.
was just clean. I thought a few bars of boom, 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 boom.
Mhm.
But if it was me playing all the way through, there would be more syncopation in it. That
Mhm.
I wouldn't just play boom, 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 I would play boom, boom,
Mhm.
no, I would syncopate it.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure it could have even been machine made. Uh,
It seems to date back to the 70s. We're pretty sure about that. So it's definitely not some whiz kid sitting with Pro Tools. We know that for sure. Um, my impression actually is that it's somebody took bits of Baby Lemonade and Gigolo Aunt. It almost sounds to me like somebody took a little bit of your drumming from Gigolo Aunt, and it sounds like David's bass playing to me too. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah, exactly. It could be that they took some of, like you said, because Gigolo Aren't that groove,
mhm.
it's a it's a shuffle,
Mhm.
and you could take 8 bars of it and turn it into a loop
Mhm.
and record it so it went on infinitum and on one machine while you added that and something else to another machine.
Mhm.
Uh, but I don't remember it. I do not remember anything about it.
I have my suspicion, for what it's worth, is that, in 1974, Sid went into the studio one more time. And they were going to try to make something out of what they had. And I wonder whether they took some outtakes and maybe tried to have Sid play something over them. There's that lead guitar line, ba-doom, boom, ba-doom, ba-doom. So
Yeah.
it's very catchy, but I think one thing I feel like I can say for sure, and I want to get your opinion on this as well, that does not sound like Nick Mason to me at all. It sounds more like you or Willie Wilson. It's a different sort of
Yeah.
style of playing completely.
Yeah. Because it is so regimented and it doesn't syncopate, it just plays it straight. It could be any one of those three.
Mhm.
Um, certainly could be Willie,
Mhm.
um, but whomever it is, I think it was somehow turned into. I mean, you've only got a minute of it anyway.
Mhm.
How much of it exists? Do you know?
The rumor has it that it was about 3.5 minutes, and the rest of it's more or less the same. That it's I mean, that's the rumor anyway. It's one of those things where I think the fans only have about a minute and a quarter of it, but there's probably more.
Hmm.
Um, so,
No,
but
I really can't. I wish I could help you, but
mhm.
it's not. It doesn't ring any bells.
Mhm.
It sounds like the sort of groove that I was had a flair for, but it doesn't sound like the way I would play it.
Mhm.
I would flower it up a bit.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's as a bass player, if I heard something that sounded like me, but I were playing exactly the same way for 20, 30, 40 bars, it'd say, well, that's not me because I'm going
Yeah,
to put in things, syncopation, fill, little improvisations, whatever it is.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we don't play like robots, so to speak.
No, no.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
So once all the sessions were done with, the gig and everything else, I do I recall correctly, you saw Sid at least once more. Was that after David's wedding?
Yeah, it was the day of David's wedding. Afterwards, they went up to, we all got together at his wedding, and it was just a few people, myself, my then wife, Willie Wilson, uh, Rick Wills and his wife, and obviously Dave and his then wife. But they were, as a reception, they had a table laid out in the canteen at Abbey Road and for food for 20 people, the band and some guests. And my wife and we went from the wedding to the house and said, we'll catch up with you at EMI later. So we got there after everybody else had already been there. And Dave was sat on one side of the table with this guy sat next to him who weighed 200 pounds or more, had no hair and no eyebrows, and looked very strange. I sat down directly opposite, and this guy kept really weirded out my wife, the way he was looking at her. She got very spooked by it. And Dave realizes that I haven't cottoned on to who it is.
Mhm.
And I believe he was the first person to realize who it was, or him or Roger, one of the two. Anyway, so Dave said, goes like this to me, well, come here. And so I leant down and he whispers in my ear, he says, do you know who that is? And as soon as he said it, I looked up and I saw his profile. And I realized, that's it. Oh my God. And at that point, I just got up and I said, oh, no, Sid, how are you? And he was just staring into the middle distance and giggling at people, making them feel a little uncomfortable. And again, we sat and ate the dinner that was provided and the cake and this and that. And the reason we were there, apart from the wedding reception side of it, was to listen to the final mix, as far as I understand it, of Wish You Were Here.
Mhm.
Sorry, Shine On, well, the whole thing,
The whole thing, yeah.
Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is very strange because they're singing this long and beautifully produced piece that was divided into different bits, but it's actually one long piece.
Mhm.
Shine On You Crazy Diamond, all about Sid. And I can't remember if someone I've read somewhere or I've seen one of them being interviewed where they asked him what he thought about it, or he asked if they needed him to overdub on it or something.
Mm. Did he say something about Mary Poppins or something like that? Is that right?
It was something strange was said about it. And I think they asked him what he thought, and he said it's a bit. I don't know. Maybe he said it was a bit Mary
Mary
Poppins.
Poppins. Yeah.
Who knows?
Huh.
But it's just so strange for that to happen, and they were distraught at his appearance and the fact that he chose that day to show up.
Mhm.
No one knew he was going to be there. No one, how he knew to be there on that day, no one knows. It's just so strange.
I have a friend of many, many years who he has schizophrenia or something very like it. And he has this uncanny ability to resurface in my life at important occasions. It's sort of like
yeah,
I remember when I was in college, he would show up out of nowhere, and this was before the internet. And I mean, he doesn't use a computer anyway, but out of nowhere, he'd just be at my front door, and it would always be, the day that my string quartet reading was happening, or I remember he resurfaced just as I was moving from one place to another. It's almost as if there's this sort of sixth sense for moments of importance. I remember you mentioned
yeah.
that Syd would show up at odd hours at your house, and yeah, my friend has this knack of he just materializes almost as if there's a script writer. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, if I'm thinking about that, there's times when I, there's some of my very, very close friends will call me out of the blue when I've just been thinking about them
Hmm.
for some reason or another.
Absolutely. That happened with me
These things
once.
happen, and there's got to be a reason for it. There's a grand plan out there.
I remember once a fellow I met in college, a drummer and a wonderful guy who turned me on to all kinds of music, and he left after a semester because he decided to do other things. One night I was thinking of him, 7 years after the fact, and I was living in Philadelphia, which was hundreds of miles away from where I went to college. I walk into a concert, and there he is right there, just sitting there. I
But
couldn't believe my eyes. It's just like, it's the most bizarre thing. So, and
this stuff happens.
yeah, was that the very last time you ever saw Sid in person?
Yeah, yeah. In person, yes, definitely.
One more question about Pink Floyd stuff, and then I just want to circle back to broader questions. There's in an interesting interview recently with Jill Furmanovsky. I don't know if you know her, a photographer who at one point was documenting the band a little bit, later. I think in 1974. But she said one of the things that was very surprising to her was that how sporty they were. That they all really liked to, play sports and
Oh
do
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
outdoor things. Did you ever play football with them or golf
Oh
or any
yeah,
of those
we
things?
we beat them wonderfully once. They thought they were the bee's knees as a football team, and we had a pretty good football team, I have to say, within the band. Three of the four members of the band were good footballers. One that wasn't was Steve. You
Hmm.
would think someone who was athletic as he was on stage would be good at something like football, but he wasn't, and he just didn't have the knack for it.
Hmm.
But Clem, Greg, and myself were all pretty decent. I had the chance to become an apprentice footballer when I was young, but
Hmm.
I chose drumming instead. So anyway, so they thought they were pretty good, and we got a team together and we challenged them. And why I say the end score was 2-2, so it was a draw.
Hmm.
But the reason I say we beat them is because our two goals were scored by band members, whereas their two goals were scored by ringers.
Oh.
To be good.
Mhm.
So that's why they both Greg and Clem scored magnificent goals that day.
Mhm. Huh.
Um, yeah,
And
but we used to play. I played for Roger's team once. He called me one day and said, "I've got a team together. Do you want to play?" And we would all Quiver, Sutherland Brothers and Quiver. The band that Willie was in. They had a
mhm.
team. Average White Band had a great team. My God, they were good.
Huh.
And we would all play each other,
Mhm.
and it was a fun time. And we would play squash together. There was a lot of sport going on at the time,
Mhm.
really.
I have to ask you an incredibly controversial question, which is who was the best footballer in Pink Floyd?
Out of the band members,
Hmm.
none of them really. None of them were, but Dave was okay.
Hmm.
Roger was all right. Nick was okay. They didn't have an outstanding player amongst the band members.
Hmm.
They had other people that worked for the band who were pretty good.
Hmm.
I'm not saying they were bad.
Right.
The difference was we did have a couple of pretty hot players in
Hmm.
the band.
Huh.
You know.
In a way, that's sort of, I think that's um, an epitaph, I guess you could say, that fits Pink Floyd. I mean, they've often talked about how they never really saw themselves as having a star in terms of playing. right? It was more the sum of the parts that made them
Yeah,
special.
exactly.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like
I
that quite
mean,
translated onto the field, though.
the smartest thing they did in the way they presented themselves was, if you think about it, their album covers, you never saw their pictures other than album cover
Hmm.
on album covers. You rarely saw, they didn't promote the way they looked.
Right.
You didn't see their pictures very often. So they could live a very normal life.
Hmm.
It wasn't like them being Paul McCartney, even though they'd become huge. Um, oh, yeah, sure, they started to get recognized here and there, but generally speaking, they engineered it
Hmm.
so that they weren't recognized a lot. They didn't have to put up with all that nonsense.
Hmm.
What they did have collectively, what they lacked in football talent, they had oodles of intelligence.
Hmm.
They're four of the brightest people I've ever met.
Hmm.
And in terms of niceness, David and Rick were the two nicest guys I've ever known.
Hmm.
You know, Dave, thankfully, is still with us. Rick, sadly, not. Um, he's not a bit stuck up or anything like that. He's just very, very nice man.
Hmm.
Um, Roger, Roger's Roger. He can be nice to you if he wants to, and he can be a complete prat when he wants to be.
Hmm.
But that's Roger. He's been both to me, and I've always been okay to him. The one that I've never got to know very well for no reason at all, because we're both drummers, is Nick. I
Hmm.
mean, he's a nice, down to earth, decent chap,
He really
but
is.
and I've never got to know him.
Huh.
I don't know why.
I mean, give him a call. He's the only one of them I've met, and he's exactly as you would expect, very, very friendly, very polite and thoughtful, and yeah, I'm proud to be able to say I've met him, and he was very. It was a pleasure. Yeah, I get to spend
Yeah,
10 minutes
because
or
I've
so with
just
him.
never had a chance to really sit down and get to know him well. And, his drumming's very different to mine. It, it suits the Floyd.
Hmm.
It helps make the chemistry that makes the Floyd. But I can't, I could see how it wouldn't work in any other band.
Hmm.
He's perfect for them.
Right.
What he does is perfect for that band.
Hmm.
Good man. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have met him many times, and he's a good man. He's been very nice.
Hmm.
I just have never got to know him well.
It sounds like the two of you are due to have a cup of tea and a chat together sometime.
Yeah,
Yeah, why not? So, circling back to some bigger picture questions in these sort of last few minutes. One thing, I know a lot of people who have become sober, who have found sobriety, and I know for all of them, it's a big source of pride and a big thing that, that I guess you could say demands continued strength and continued perseverance. And I'm thinking of this because I've mentioned among other things, you played with John Entwistle, someone who I think, was taken from us
yeah.
far too soon, and I wish we're still here. Do you have any memories of John that you'd like to share?
Yes. Well, the week that we did the backing tracks of his album, we did the whole album in a week, from starting on a Monday, ending on a Friday, and then we had to go back on the following Monday just to pick up our paycheck and listen back to see if there was any little bits needed doing, etc. That same week, my mother was in hospital on what I now know was her deathbed. She
Hmm.
was dying of cancer. And so I was fighting this, father saying, well, go to work, take your mind off it, and then go visit mum in between. And I did. And then we get to the weekend, we get all the tracks done. There's a lot of drinking going on, and I'm a lousy drunk. I'm not a professional drinker. No, I couldn't handle my booze then, and it took me 20 years to figure out I'd better stop this, and did so nearly 30 years ago. But anyway, there was one time where we'd been back and forward, we'd made some tracks, then we'd go to the Shas Club, then we go back and make some more tracks, then go to the speakeasy, then go back and finish up. And by that time, not only had we been to the pub and back several times, but the grand piano with the lid closed was
Mhm.
full of booze. The entire
Oh.
top of that was any type of liquor that you could wish for. That's a lot of liquor, and it would be, most of it would be gone by the end of the evening. Let's put it like that.
Mhm.
There's one track on that album. John later in life swore to me that it was Heaven and Hell, but I thought it was a version of Cinnamon Girl that we did that came out later as an extra track.
Mhm.
Whichever one it was, I fell asleep from being so drunk.
Wow.
I was still playing, and I kept playing asleep until it got to the end. And what happened was I woke up in time to see the guitar player, Serrano, signaling me for the end.
Mhm.
And I blew it because it was like, oh, whoops. And so I faded it, but it stayed in tempo
Mhm.
all the way through.
Wow.
Anyway, end of the week comes, Saturday, I go to the hospital, and as I'm walking into, or actually not running, but walking at pace into the ward where mum is, and her sister comes out of her room wailing,
Oh.
screaming. So I knew what was happening was just happened. I run in there and saw my mother draw her last breath. Completely. I was due to go on tour 2 or 3 days time, which was pretty intense itself. And my father insisted that I went. It would be better to, you know, take my mind off it. That meant I missed her funeral. But anyway, I went to the studio that Monday after she died. Now, I was supposed to get paid precisely half the amount that John and the guitar player were getting paid because John was financing it and paying himself and the guitar player and myself. They were getting £300 each, and I was getting £150. So I go into the studio and I sit and listen to what's going on. He doesn't say anything. I don't say anything about what's happened. He hands me an envelope with my check in it. And so I open it up and it's £300.
Mhm.
It's double what I was supposed to get. And all he said was, I just thought that might help considering the circumstances.
Mhm.
And I couldn't believe how nice that, what a lovely gesture. That doesn't sound like a lot of money. Back then, it was a
Oh yeah.
lot more money than it is now. Yeah, those were the two abiding memories I've got of those sessions. One very funny and one very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then I found out years later that Roy Thomas Baker was the engineer. I didn't know that. I
Oh,
had no.
neither did I. For those of our listeners who subsist on a diet mainly of Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett, many of them will probably know you're playing very well on those Syd Barrett records and perhaps not elsewhere. Is there one recording that, if you had to send one song out into space to be found by aliens, 500,000 years from now, what do you think is that moment on record or maybe live, where you think that's what I wanted to do as a drummer? Like I feel. Is there any one song that makes you think, this is me at my best? This is what I've always hoped to.
You mean of Sid or
Oh,
of anything?
of anything. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, hot and nasty.
Okay, that's the one.
I my humble pie.
Hmm.
Um, and Live With Me by Humble Pie. Those two are my favourites. If I had to pick them, like you said,
Hmm.
then there's just something about the groove of each one of them. And I do a role at the beginning of Live With Me that is it impressed me. I thought, I remember playing that.
Hmm.
So yeah, those two are my favourites without any question of a doubt.
And is there a favorite gig that you remember? One gig in particular that was sort of felt.
There's a few really. I mean, you can't beat what happened at Shea Stadium.
Mhm.
I found out an interesting fact about Shea Stadium years later, which was that there were three English drummers that played it between the Beatles show in '65 or whatever it
That
was
sounds right.
and the Grand Funk show in '71. The first one was Tony Newman, dear friend of mine, playing drums for Sounds Incorporated,
Hmm.
who would open up for the Beatles wherever they went.
Mhm.
They took Sounds Incorporated with them. So then he was the first British drummer to play Shea Stadium.
Mhm.
The next one, of course, was Ringo later that night.
Mhm.
And the third one in 1971 was Little Me with Humble Pie.
Hmm.
So that's quite something, you know. Um, and as far as the favourite gig goes, wow, there was just so many great moments. I remember one in Westchester, Virginia, that was remarkable. It was just a sea of people. But then there was Hyde Park in London, all with Grand Funk again, that was again as far as you could see people, and the show was fantastic. And it was right. We didn't know it at the time that Peter was about to leave, but it was right before he left. And the Hollywood Bowl was a tremendous show. We were lucky to get on some of the bigger shows that were happening at the time. There was one with Alice Cooper at the Pittsburgh Three River Stadium,
Mhm.
whereby he had a ramp out from the front of the stage that was built just strong enough for him to go out on. And Steve was allowed to use it. But what they didn't anticipate while we were on was that the crowd would rush the stage and get up on this thing with him. And they were panicking that would it hold up? And Alice was lovely about it because we went down a storm. We absolutely did. And that was back in his drinking days. And again, he's been sober now for a very long time.
Mhm.
But he came to our dressing room and he leant against the doorway with a Budweiser in his hand. And he looked at us and he said, how in the fuck do you expect me to follow that? Of course, he did, and he
Mhm.
did it wonderfully. But what a nice thing to do. What a nice thing to say. Um, so there was a few great moments like that.
Mhm. And finally, are there any projects? I mean, obviously, I know that I think the word that you sometimes use is overseeing the current incarnation of, humble
Yeah.
pie. And are there any other projects that you have going, whether it's, new music and original music, or whether it's archival releases that
No,
you'd like to tell
it's
everybody?
just making sure that the archival side of, that our catalogue is well presented.
Hmm.
That there was a time there where some people got a hold illegally of some of our catalogue
Hmm.
without getting proper copyright permissions and were releasing it on backstreet labels. I put a stop to all of that,
Hmm.
and I got UMG to re-release the entire catalogue with, well, Peter and I worked on it together. I can't take all the credit on two things. One was the reissue of the live album, all four shows, and the other one was getting the vinyl box set and vinyl and CD box set of our entire catalogue. Um, and a few other things. There was a couple of albums we made um, with what I suppose you'd call Humble Pie Mark II with Bobby Tench and Anthony Jones
Hmm.
and on Atco, and we've remastered and reissued those, and just generally keeping an eye on it and making sure it's no cowboys are taking hold of it like they did for a while.
Right. I remember that happened to Gong for the band, David Allen's band, for a while, as you would go into the store and you would find all these bootleg versions, basically, of their albums that sounded like they'd been copied from a cassette tape. And it
In
didn't,
fact,
didn't,
what I did, the advice indirectly of Bob Dylan, a friend of mine used to work as his road manager, and they were on the bus, and he was playing the road manager was playing a humble pie bootleg of a live show,
of a live show. Okay. Mhm.
and apparently Dylan, who was a fan of Steve's and liked the band, said to him, you know, you should tell them to put that, collect as many of the bootlegs together as you can and put them out as a box
Yes.
set because that stops the bootleggers. You
Yes.
know, that you are claiming it's yours anyway, even though someone else recorded it, it's your performance.
Hmm.
You have no right to release it. So you release it properly, you remaster it, you repackage it as best as you can. And it's not the greatest quality,
Hmm.
but bootlegs aren't, you
Hmm.
know.
I
And
think,
and that did very well. That series, I think there was 4 or 5 box sets of Humble Pie bootleg box sets, and it did quite well.
mhm.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, a lot of bands, The Doors, Gentle Giant, and now even Pink Floyd, to a degree, have come around to that way of thinking. They've started putting out on Spotify whole bunches of live shows. They kind of made a mess of it at first. They were using not the best copies, but over time, yeah, I mean, fans love to hear, you go into a studio or you go to a high profile gig and sometimes everybody freezes up. Whereas on those nights that you don't think anybody's recording, you play, sometimes you play out of your mind because you don't think there's a tape running. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think the fans sometimes really love those documents, but they love to be able to give the artists the money. They would far rather see the artists get the money
Well,
than.
that's right. That was the whole point of what we did. And I didn't. I, I don't mind people recording and for their own purposes. What I
Mhm.
did mind was them making money that we weren't getting any part of.
Right.
And the same thing with merchandise. We started our own merchandise company, which we didn't have before.
Hmm.
Back in the day, we didn't sell T-shirts; we gave them away.
Right. It's a form of advertising, really.
One thing you asked, which was the better footballers, us or Floyd? Well, if you go to the business side, which was the better businessman, definitely the Floyd. I mean, they were selling shirts when before people sold shirts, you
Mhm.
know. So anyway, it's been
But
lovely talking to you. It's
it's
been
been
joyful.
absolutely lovely. It's such a pleasure, and I hope that our listeners, many of whom again have Pink Floyd in the morning and Pink Floyd for for their dinner at night, will take some time to check out some of the recordings we've discussed outside that world. But thank you so much for your time. Incredibly grateful, and
You're
it's been absolutely
welcome.
lovely.
My
And
pleasure.
to all our listeners, be sure to hit that subscribe button and all that sort of business. But for now, bye bye.